Good morning. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this webinar in which we talk about the climate change COP25 and about the World Biogas Association Climate Declaration. Now, I know a lot of you are just logging in now. There are over 200 of you registered. And just a little bit of housekeeping. Firstly, that you have on your bottom of your Zoom screen a question and answer button that you can write questions to us. And if we manage to, within the time we have available, we two speakers will do our best to answer them. You can also send an email to Robert, who has sent you his email address. And if they are longer questions, then we will come back to you with the replies to those after this webinar. So thank you for joining us. Who are we? Well, I'm very honored and very pleased that we have with us today speaking, and you can see her on the screen, Helena Molin Valdez, who is the head of the Secretariat at the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. And the coalition she will tell us about works on reducing short-lived climate pollutants. Welcome, Helena. And I am David Newman. I'm the president of the World Biogas Association. We aim to be speaking for this webinar to take around about 45 minutes. Eleanor and I will speak each for around about 15 minutes, and then we will try to answer your questions through the Zoom portal before closing. Good. So, Eleanor, I will pass over to you now, and I will mute my mic while you open yours. Welcome, Eleanor.
Very good, thank you. Maybe you can just make another click so we get the full. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a few minutes about the COP25 in Madrid. As you know, the UN Climate Change Convention, UNFCCC, meets once per year. Hence, number 25 means that they have met during 25 years in the committee of the parties to that convention. The Paris Agreement was adopted at COP25, COP15, which makes it already 5 years ago, sorry. COP20, I'm crazy now because it was COP15 was earlier than that, of course. So COP20, 5 years ago, the Paris Agreement was negotiated and adopted by member states as a huge victory for the diplomacy. Anyhow, in parallel, of course, a lot has happened on climate action, despite slow negotiation towards a common framework and a common rule book that was set out in the Paris Agreement. Last year at COP25 in Madrid, it was supposed to happen in Chile, but as you know, for different reasons, it was moved to Madrid. Still, Chile was the presidency, and as you can see from this screen, and for those of you who were involved, there was quite a lot of disappointment because what we call the rule book of the implementation for the Paris Agreement was supposed to be finalized and adopted at this event, and there were still a few outstanding issues that was not solved. So the overall media coverage was really about a kind of a failure, that the implementation has not been taken seriously, that there is not enough ambition by countries to go ahead and achieve the emission reductions that are required to avoid 1.5 degree and to stay way below the 2 degrees increase of temperature by the end of the century. Our Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, also expressed his disappointment, but this also, the fact that it wasn't a huge victory and that the agreement were not fully, the agreement around the rule was not fully adopted, this also has strengthened the resolve of the United Nations and the Secretary General of the UN to help doing more. So not all was bad in Madrid. So the implementation of the agreement is supposed to start in 2020, the year we are in now. And there is a lot of indication that countries, those that stay within the agreement, and we are not going to talk about those that have expressed their interest of completely not following through, is indeed increasing. Just to mention one, the European Union Green Deal is quite an interesting commitment by all the member states of the the European Union. And maybe you can talk about that with them when you meet them later today, David. We also have the youth movement and a lot of popular interest on achieving much stronger actions towards climate neutrality by the youth, but also by others. Of course, not everybody is on board on this, but at least in media and in the general, let's say, awareness, this issue is now much more in the forefront. And also in Madrid, there was a lot of private sector initiatives and good examples, you representing one of those, that would help countries feel confident that they can indeed achieve more neutrality moving forward. Can you just go to the next one, David? So a few things that were pending that were not resolved in Madrid by the governments negotiating was one, that the national determined contributions, which are what the plans that countries put forward, were not enough, didn't show enough ambition. The thing is that these enhanced national determined contributions, the deadline to present them is actually at COP26. And this is what brings us towards COP26 in Glasgow in November. So countries are working on their action plans, their national plans, and they are setting targets for reductions. And it's not only CO2 reductions, of course, that counts. It is all the greenhouse gases that contribute to global warming, methane being one of those. And methane, as you know, is 25 times or more, depending on how you count, more powerful than CO2 over a 100-year period, but over a 20-year period, which is less, since methane is only in the atmosphere for 12 years or so, it actually means that it's more than 85% times more powerful than CO2. So this is an important point for countries as well to take into consideration when they announce their new ambitions. So most countries are working on new plans. Many countries are already in their final stages. They also consult with private sector in most countries to get to these ambitions, and we all together can make this happen. The plan is for this plan, as you can see on the time scale here, just to give you a perspective, that the agreement comes into force in 2020. And by that time, countries are supposed to present their new plans and pledges. Not all of them will, and there will be in 23 a global stock take of what has happened. And then by 2025, every 5 years, countries are supposed to increase their ambition and revise their plans. I'm mentioning this because it's an opportunity also to introduce new measures and for biogas, for example, to be a more solution in the forefront. The second point that wasn't resolved in Madrid at COP25 was what is referred to as Article 6 in the Paris Agreement, and that is about emission trading and market mechanisms. Again, I think your industry is an area where this can become an important opportunity for countries to use this mechanism when it's finally agreed upon to move into technological solutions on biogas. Next. So I'm going to say a few words about us. So the Climate and Clean Air Coalition was set up in 2012 to reduce the short-lived climate pollutants, and that includes methane, black carbon, and hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs. We are a voluntary coalition, so we are not a binding agreement coalition the way that the UNFCCC convention is set up. But the purpose of this coalition is still very firm, and it's led by member states and countries to take policies, regulations, and practices forward in collaboration with international organizations, NGOs, cities, and an increasing number of businesses, focusing not on the CO2 emissions, but focusing on these other non-CO2 gases, as I mentioned, the ones that are short-lived in the atmosphere and can help to achieve faster action and also then quicker results on the temperature avoidance, which is very, very important. This coalition is focusing on science-based solutions to achieve reductions, and it's also built on a lot of political leadership and awareness raising for these policy solutions. Most of the countries are represented in this coalition through their ministries of environment, which doesn't mean that it's also needed to reach out to the other ones on energy. Next one. So we are focusing on 11, 12 sectors that mainly are those that create methane, black carbon, on HFC or HFC emissions. The whole science-based solution concept is to focus on these sectors where by 2030, there could be a reduction in emissions that could help avoid more than 0.5 degree of warming, and at the same time support the health objectives, reducing premature mortality and also the loss of crops by reducing these emissions. I'm not going to go into all of these sectors, but let's move on and focusing on two. Next one, we are going to focus on waste and agriculture, which are two of those initiatives that the Climate and Clean Air Coalition partnership has led to quite a lot of change already in the sector. So in the waste sector, as you know, that most of you are very much familiar with, it is a substantial source of what we refer to as short-lived climate pollutants, including the methane and black carbon. And the landfills are the third largest source of global anthropogenic methane emissions. Open burning of waste emits a lot of black carbon and other pollutants. And of course, black carbon is also emitted through dirty diesel or vehicles that are not in full shape, so to say. So through the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, we have created this initiative to reduce emissions across the solid waste sector by providing a comprehensive package of resources and partnerships. So next, please. I just want to show you what kind of activity. You can just click a few times. So what we are trying to do as a coalition, as I mentioned, we are 67 countries and altogether more than 150 partners, and we are working together in these different initiatives to contribute to where there have been perceived gaps or barriers for the sectors to move on and reduce the emissions that are required. In the waste sector, the areas that have been very strongly put forward is to improve the waste collection and handling the equipment within the informal sector, and within the formal sector, it has been focusing mainly on reducing waste generation. But most importantly here for both sectors is that we are promoting organic diversion and treatment programs, composting, anaerobic digestion, which is very close to what we are talking about today, of course. And we are also trying to institute recycling programs and the use at the landfills as final disposal option and enhance landfill operation. So what we are doing, because we are a policy-based organization, we try to enable policy changes while we are also working directly with cities to make the assessments and the plans for them to address these issues. On the climate change side, and for the former process, we're also trying to measure and track the short-lived climate pollutant emission reductions, which can be helpful when countries indeed are setting their national objectives and making their national determined contributions. We would like to see the waste sector much more in the forefront of these climate policies, as well as for city purposes and development purposes. And finally, on communication, I mean, it's really about communicating what the benefits are with these solutions and how it reaches the households and the users, the end users, so to say. Next one, please. So the type of activities that the coalition, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, is engaged in includes direct technical assistance done through our partner organizations. ISWA is one of the areas, C40. There are many technical, the US Environment Protection Agency and other expert organizations in this area provide direct technical assistance. We provide tools and resources. We promote information exchange and networking opportunities among the cities and the stakeholders dealing with the waste sector globally and regionally. We have regional networks now among cities and technical institutions, and to highlight what works best. We do training and capacity building for city officials, and we have created what we refer to as a knowledge platform that compiles and organizes these resources from partners, from cities, case studies, guidance document, databases of partners, experts, and organizations. Next one. So this is just to show you this, the website for that platform, waste.ccacoalition.org. And there is a number of cities. We now have, I think, 150 plus cities involved in this network across the different regions. And we I mentioned in the beginning that we are also very much a coalition trying to drive leadership and policy decisions. And we have a high-level assembly that meets at least once per year of ministers and heads of organizations. And in 2017, one of the commitments of this body was to support each other as partner countries and organizations to take action by national, state, and local governments to avoid and reduce methane emissions by diverting organic waste from landfills, which includes preventing and reducing food waste and partnerships with the private sector. And I think this is a commitment that we are pushing very hard, and many of our member countries are in the forefront of this as well. And I think it's something that you can also use as an association to forward your cause. Next one. So just to summarize a few of the ongoing work streams that we have under this particular initiatives that links to the biogas and bioenergy work in the next couple of years are what is listed here. So one is that we work very much with something called the Global Methane Initiative, GMI, and disseminating their biogas project risk analysis tools and working with them to identify a few countries where we can systematically work on their national determined contribution enhancement, the national climate action plans that I referred to, with capacity building activities. In India, we are working now to promote a decentralized biodigesters approach or solution in a few cities. We are also doing something similar with the agriculture sector that we can look at later. And with this, we are collaborating with the US Environment Protection Agency and GMI and the Indian-based TERI. And we're exploring what the opportunities and challenges for this technology is. I see this as a kind of collaborative effort that you get involved in. So we are supporting also, or it's underway at least, how we can eventually support the closure of open dumps in Lebanon and Indonesia. These are concrete requests that we have received from these governments. Of course, there are many others involved in this as well, but our role is to support the assessment of how much biogas. One of the requests is to assess how much biogas is generated through these dumps and propose solutions to capture and use the biogas from those disposal sites. We're also working with the city of Johannesburg to develop an anaerobic digestion plant in the city. And finally, we are supporting quite a few cities now to divert organic waste from landfills, including the setup of separation at source of organic waste from diverse sectors. This, of course, is linked also to the segregation of waste. So as you see, there's quite a lot going on, but most importantly, through these activities, we are also raising the awareness around the cities in the networks that this is possible, and also for them to support each other in solutions. You can go to next one now. I wanted to also just mention the other initiative that deals with agriculture in the CCC, supporting countries to identify increasingly ambitious actions, policies, and targets across the food system. So we work to reduce methane and black carbon. As I mentioned, that's our main target. And that, of course, then involves the livestock sector, including manure management and enteric fermentation, looking at alternative feeds, etc. We are working to reduce methane also from paddy rice, with a few countries in the lead here. And we are looking at reducing open burning by solutions that take care of the rubble and the stubbles without having to burn it. Of course, that becomes then biomass. And it's not a simple solution, as you all know, but this is something that has caught the attention of many of the participants in the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. And finally, we are working in an increasing manner, and it has not been a lot, on the bioenergy sphere, let's say, of the agriculture sector. Next. So a few prospects here for linking our work to biogas and bioenergy with the agriculture sector, just to have something to think of. First of all, I wanted to mention agriculture as one of the areas in the climate change negotiations and at the COPs, in this sense, with the negotiators of the countries, as being always a very sensitive area that hasn't yet come to agreement with how to deal with the emissions from the sector. it's a big source of emissions, but of course the food production and the food security is an important element for development, and it's a very important and sensitive area for many national economies. So therefore, the agriculture sector within the climate change sphere has always been a very sensitive area to work with. We are entering this area with the purpose of developing sustainable food production, of course. So it's not a matter of like stopping livestock, etc., just to get rid of emissions. It's a way. It's about finding solutions that reduce the emissions and make can also increase production at the same time for farmers. We work a lot with the UN-based organization on food and agriculture, the FAO, which also then have its membership is the ministries of agriculture and food, and many of the farming organizations participate actively as well. Just a few examples of this particular energy, biogas and bioenergy sector. Nigeria is one of the countries that have shown extremely a lot of interest in this area, and we are working on now on a potential assistance to build institutional capacity to restructure their whole greenhouse gas inventory for the livestock sector and improving their data to MRVs, monitor, review, and verify this data as a baseline to inform animal husbandry and sustainable livestock development policies. So this is a very important area because, as I mentioned, this is a sensitive topic, and the more countries that start to have this data available, the more they can use it also for setting policies. And that includes, of course, the findings to evaluate potential biogas markets. In India, again, coming back to India, we are supporting, we are starting to support development of integrated strategies for crop residue management and assessment of the potential to produce energy from the residue, and the feasibility in this context of the bioenergy technologies. So we have been working in the Punjab area, which is one of the bigger burners and also one of the biggest contributors to air pollution in the whole Delhi area. We have seen many pictures from New Delhi and the heavy smoke and pollution in this city. Unfortunately, part of it comes from the agriculture sector and the areas around. So it's a very important connection also to health aspects and to reduce air pollution problems. We are working on the interest to evaluate anaerobic and co-digestion of cow dung and rice straw from biogas in India. So back again to India. This is something we're doing with the ministry, but also with some of the NGOs and players in India, and it's led by FAO, the UN body for food and agriculture. And finally here, we are working since quite a few years now with FAO and others on integrated manure management, and some of the past projects focused on improving management of manure and bio-slurry from household biogas plants, training of extension workers. We worked a lot on this in Malawi and Ethiopia. It's not as easy solution as you know, but when it works, it has been working very well. The question would be how to scale this up and how to make it sustainable solutions for small scale farmers. Yes, so my time is more than up now, so I just wanted to say a few words at the very end on moving towards the COP26 and in Glasgow that we started off with, and the purpose of this webinar. So I thought that we could maybe think of one thing that is constant and that we need to be very hard working on, which is to raise the awareness on the solutions at hand and how the solutions will help raise the ambition of countries towards net zero emissions. It's very important that we can consistently spread the same messages and provide very clear science-based data on these solutions to get them into the national plans and also to get them into the policy decisions being made both locally and nationally, which also will drive investments in these solutions. And secondly, if we could work, we work already now in quite a few countries. We work in around 30 countries on their national plans. Maybe 8 or 9 of these have very clear indication of interest to reduce methane and work on also alternative solutions, which could include biogas, short-lived climate pollutants. So that's something maybe we can, out of this, if we can identify at least one country where we can do something concretely and that could be showcased at COP26, that can demonstrate some concrete results, and we can work on some side events where we can cross-fertilize with presenters on these issues. And we as a coalition, the Climate Engineering Coalition, we will hold our next ministerial high-level assembly at the COP26 in Glasgow. And again, it's an opportunity to raise some of these issues with ministers there, and at least to talk at the side and see what's you know, to get these solutions in their hands. We have a preparatory meeting, a working group meeting in Manila, the Philippines, end of April. And again, there we will have more working level representatives from these countries that can also be presented with these ideas. So a little bit of overview of what we do, and also what I think we can do towards COP26 in this field. So back to you, David. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Helena. That was a very complete view, not a little overview. That was a very complete view of the work going on. And thank you for explaining to us the process, because I think a lot of people, as you said, were very disappointed by what happened in Madrid. But that's also because they didn't really understand too much the mechanisms and the time scale of the whole process. And it is not a process which finishes in any 1 year. It's a process which continues as we go forward. So let's not be pessimistic. Let's be optimistic, and let's carry on pushing. We've been pushing on biogas, as you know, and we're very proud to be a member of the CCAC. And I've just had confirmation this morning that we are now also a member of the CTCN, which for our listeners means it's the technical body of the United Nations, with which CCAC works on some of these projects. So we will be hopefully more by your side as we go forward, Helena.
Yes, good.
Now, we presented a report last summer. I just go through it very, very quickly, some of the key findings, that the current potential of biogas globally is actually only being exploited to a very, very small degree. And all the projects you were talking about, Helena, are signs of growing interest and growing implementation of biogas. But let's be honest with ourselves at the moment. It's a very small industry compared to what it could be. And let's have a look at what the potential of biogas could be. And if we, based on the report, which you can read online, we take a baseline of what is interceptable, what materials can actually be brought into treatment and what can't be. But if we were to have a sort of perfect world in about 10 years' time, we could reduce around about 12% of global greenhouse gas emissions on the baseline of 2017. That's equivalent to about a quarter of all the coal currently used, and about 6% of all the inorganic fertilizers currently used, which of course also are produced from gas and oil and coal. So quite a significant potential for the industry. And if we look at it in terms of energy, what energy could we produce? Well, natural gas, we could produce the same amount of natural gas globally as Germany today consumes, or the same amount of electricity to be able to supply 124 million people. And through the various feedstocks you can see there, whether it's food waste, whether it comes from animal husbandry or crop residues or energy crops grown specifically, or sewage, you can see the very, very significant amount of energy which we would be able to produce using biogas. And of course, energy crops and crop residues and livestock all fit into that agricultural sector, which you're working so hard on at the CCAC. And in natural gas terms, just crop residues could actually supply the whole of China and Japan at current levels. So it's a vast potential. And if we look at the potential in terms of greenhouse gas emissions abatement, then again, various sectors, food, livestock, crop residues, energy crops, and sewage give different results. But food waste globally, if we were to capture 70% of the food waste which we currently throw into the environment or into landfills, we would be able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by the equivalent of those made from the United Kingdom in 2017, or from crop residues from the emissions made by Canada in 2017. So again, these are very, very substantial greenhouse gas emissions which we could avoid by capturing these wastes and making biogas from them. And of course, there's the output. There's the physical output, not the material output. Not just gas. There's nutrient output. And that is equivalent, the amount of nutrient recycling which we could produce at a regime would be equivalent to all the fertilizers today used in Brazil and Indonesia. And of course, the more biogas you produce, the more nutrient availability you have. And I won't bore you with all the figures there, you can read them in the slides, but we're around about 5 or 6 or 7% of the various key nutrient elements put into the agricultural market today. So how do we do that? Well, you know, there's a lot of policies, and I know you work on these on a daily basis, Eleanor, and these are some of the ideas. And of course, the subsidies which we still have to coal and oil are really quite absurd in this day and age. Our own country, the United Kingdom, from where I work, gives some 300 million pounds a year to the Green Climate Fund and gives some 14 billion pounds in tax breaks to the oil industry. So we've got to turn this around and quite quickly. Countries have adopted, of course, zero emission targets, our own United Kingdom 2050, others earlier, 2030, 2040. And we think the biogas targets should be in these energy plans, should be in these NDCs, which countries are finalizing this year. We are writing to many of them to do that and to put those in the greenhouse gas abatement targets, to look at turning around some of the incentives. I was in one country, I won't give the name, and they said, oh no, we have no incentives for energy at all. And then somebody tapped the minister on the shoulder and said, well, actually, that's not true. Our bottled gas, our bottled color gas, which people use in their homes for cooking, is all subsidized and at a rate which costs the treasurer of that country some 200 to 300 million euro a year. Now, that's quite a poor country, a North African country. Now, imagine if that energy incentive was gradually turned around into renewable energy such as biogas and what that could do. And we need to set up the market mechanisms as you were talking about on trading also the certificates for greenhouse gas abatements, and fit all this into the circular economy strategies as a preferred method of treatment. And of course, at the supply end, you have the work you're doing on, and I want to ask you a question on this, on food waste management, Helena, in a second, and on looking at nutrient recoveries, looking at improving the sanitation infrastructure so that we actually capture these wastes, and creating the infrastructure, just as we did with other renewable energies, so that biomethane can become a continuous 24/7 supply chain for our energy infrastructures. So there's a lot of things to do, there's a lot of things to work on, and we're pushing these messages, and we're writing to ministries throughout the world, helping them to understand the role that our industry can play leading up to COP26, and we hope to meet many of them there and to dialogue with them there with you as well, Hannah. There's a couple of questions I had for you, particularly on food waste management. You're doing a lot of work there, and I'd like you, if you would share with me just for a minute, where you've seen progress being most made. And the reason I ask this for you is because 2 years ago, you know, we did a sort of global survey on food waste management. And we found that very, very few countries around the world are actually intercepting any food waste at all. All food waste, and in developing countries, that sometimes constitutes as much as 50, 60, 70% of the waste stream, is still going to landfill, or a little bit going to animal feed. Have you got any sense, Eleanor, that this is changing and that it's improving? And have you got any examples to share with us?
Well, I think that this is a very important area of work, and within the UN system, there is a group that's led by UNEP and FAO that have set up this food waste campaigning structures, let's say, to just raise the awareness. So you can see, and I don't know if you have seen any of those ads or whatever it goes out. So if I live in France, so at least here in France, there has been quite a lot on a public awareness
Sure.
side, and there is also some companies that have and supermarkets that have picked it up. On the country level, it was Germany, in our coalition, it was Germany, Canada, who were pushing this as a kind of a political commitment by our country partners to take it up and do something with it. And we have seen, and this is just a small part of the global community, obviously, but I think that countries like Italy, who have some real targets put in place and some, I think, some enforcement models as well, where supermarkets are not allowed to throw away waste because they have to provide a solution where it goes in the second life. And we have also worked through this city network that I referred to before in the waste sector. There are cities, for example, in Indonesia and other places that have put in place very stringent city-level systems of recovering food waste and using it for a secondary life, let's say either gas or, most importantly, I think they have been using it for fertilizers and things like this.
Sure.
And then in Japan is the other country in CCSC that has taken leadership in the Municipal Solid Waste Initiative. And as you know, they have also many cities that have taken far more stringent, let's say, actions than maybe the national community. So
sure.
I don't know if I answer your question here, but I think
yes.
it starts with awareness, some political leadership, and to demonstrate the benefit, how it works. And then to get some negotiation also, because it's food waste and it's food loss, and from farmer to market, and then from market to household, and then in households. So you have like 3-4 different places where this food waste is happening.
Yes, I think I'm a sort of moderately intelligent person, but I can never really get my head around an industry like the food industry, which actually throws away 30 to 40% of everything that it produces. I mean, can you imagine making cars and then just destroying every third car because you can't sell it or because you don't want to take it to market? So, we really are still throwing away enormous, I think 1.6 billion tons of food every year, and using equivalent to the land area of China for the amount of food waste that we create, which is really absurd. But no, you partially answer my question because we know in Europe and we know in Japan and Korea that they are Japan and Korea are very ahead on food waste and send it back to animal feed, and in Europe that is not allowed anymore. But what I'm not seeing, for example, in Africa, in a lot of Asia, the Middle East and Central Asia, even Latin America, I'm seeing very, very, very few examples still today of cities tackling food waste. And I think that really is a big opportunity in terms of the greenhouse gas commitments. We've just calculated, I think just yesterday in the United Kingdom, that food waste alone in the United Kingdom, by tackling and putting into biogas, can contribute to a 6% reduction in greenhouse gases. So that's, it's a considerable amount, and it's actually a reasonably easy thing to do. And we have lots of experiences in cities and countries doing it already.
If I may say, it's also part of our consumption patterns that we want to see full shelves when we go to a shop. And if it's not full, people don't feel comfortable buying. So if the food is starting to run out, like vegetables or fruits, shop owners think that it's a bad thing. So they prefer to have it filled up, even though it will be lost. And the other point in terms of consumers is that we like fruits and vegetables now that look beautiful. And if they're not beautiful, they're also thrown away. So I think that's also kind of a psychological and consumer-driven, let's say, appetite that we could change eventually and try to make it, the locally produced food, etc., that doesn't look beautiful might be much tastier and of course, much more sustainable as well.
We call them wonky veg in the UK, this big movement about using wonky fruit and wonky vegetable. There is one question come in asking about the use of biogas for urban mobility. And yes, I think you will find, this comes from Dunia, hi Dunia, the use of biogas in many cities particularly around the first world, for either producing electricity, which is then used to charge electrical vehicles, or for feeding into vehicles themselves, is already consolidated. And I will be visiting with our CEO, the United Nations Climate Change Headquarters in Bonn next month, and we will be going there with a biogas-driven car. We can see biogas-driven buses and biogas-driven trucks on our roads all over the world. And I think that using biogas, using biomethane as a transport fuel, or as a way of producing electricity, which is then charging cars, is part of what we are about. Eleanor, we shared with you in Paris a few months ago the declaration that we delivered to the United Nations. We delivered that in Madrid, and listeners to this can download it on our website. This is a very, very long website address here, but if you click the World Biogas Association website, you will find the declaration. And we have taken that, and we'll be discussing with the United Nations Climate Change Secretariat next month about the implementation of that. And I look forward to our collaboration in Glasgow. Have you got any words of advice for us over this next few months?
Well, you know, in the COPs, the Committee of the Parties of UNFCCC, there are what is referred to as the blue zone and the green zone. So the blue zone is basically where the negotiators meet, and it's very formal, and not always are the negotiators those people that actually do implement things at country level or local level or purchase services that are required. So the blue zone, I'm using it as a metaphor to work with the policymakers and the negotiators, the ones that plan for the climate ambitions, is an important part, and you're doing it through UNFCCC, but I think it's also very important to do it in a few of the countries that might lead on this in the negotiations. And then the green zone as a metaphor for private sector and say the doers, the implementers, it's equally important. So again, you know, we work on the negotiation, work on the planning, but then to have some very concrete, good examples, like in Denmark or in Japan, or if in some developing country like Indonesia or Nigeria, where practical solutions have been implemented, have been demonstrated, and where it can also, you know, show as inspiration for others. So blue zone, green zone, working both on the policy and the negotiating official statements, as well as the implementation. And that during the COPs themselves, these are also two spaces where you meet different kinds of stakeholders that would take it on in a different mode. So maybe that's a piece of advice. We can also work together on some of these areas. Yeah.
Yes, I think that the key to all this is going to be cooperation, because, you know, not one of us has the force and the strength and the resources to be able to do everything, and I think we need to cooperate. So I look forward to being able to do that with you, Eleanor. Now, I don't know if you can see them, but there are some questions come in, and let's, the questions are firing in, and we're going to run out of time, but let's see if there's any that you can answer here, Eleanor. For example, question to Eleanor, based on your presentation, who funds these projects and your activities? That's one question. And another one is, I'm a private company. Can I use rice straw to make biogas in the Philippines? Can I join the CCAC? How can I join it? Maybe you would like to tell them that. Yes,
so we have a trust fund set up and managed by the United Nations Environment Programme. This trust fund gets resources mainly from governments. We have now 17 governments who have put in money into this trust fund. And then some of the activities that are prioritized by the coalition partners are being funded through this trust fund. Most of the activities, however, are actually resourced directly by the partners. And that's kind of the power of having a good coalition, where small seed funding can generate a lot of additional resources by interested parties. They're interested for three reasons, I would say. One, because it helped them become cleaner and better and do better policy. Secondly, it helps them because they might want to promote some of their own policies or offers. And thirdly, it's of interest because you might also be able to sell some of those services and open markets for new technologies that are cleaner and better. So I think those three motivations are very clear for many of our collaborations in the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. And to join the coalition, it's driven by member states, but many of the majority of the partners are not member states, but rather NGOs like the World Biogas Association, for example, ISWA and others. And for companies like the one that you are representing from the Philippines, you can join us as well. And we call this, you can join us to collaborate in specific activities to start with, and to maybe present some of your offers, if you want, through some of the gatherings and meetings that we convene as the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. I suggested that you contact me so I can explain more. On our website, there is also an area where it says how to engage, where some of this is explained, but I'm happy to offer some specific answers individually. We have a couple of big meetings every year where our partners come together. The next one will be in Manila in the Philippines. And every time we come together, we also try to have a marketplace of solutions and where private sector can also demonstrate some of their products for the partners that come together.
Okay, one other question for you, and then I'm going to close, Elena, because we've come to our time limit. Ronnie asks, do you plan to set up regional hubs, or do you have country representatives? And I think the answer to that is possibly no, but maybe you would like to explain.
Yeah, so we have country we call them focal points from countries, and they are most often sitting in the Ministry of Environment, and they are often then also convening other sectors at national level. We don't have regional hubs. We work through the UNEP regional offices when we need to do regional, or we work through regional organizations such as the European Union, European Commission in Europe, ASEAN in Southeast Asia, Central American Environment Council when it's in Central America, etc., etc. So that's how we work.
Yes, okay, all right. Now, Elena, there's a lot of questions here which are specific to biogas. And I will try to answer one or two of them, and please feel free to join me. But if you wish, and you're busy and you wish to sign out, then I would understand, because these are quite technical questions. But if you wish to join me just for another 5 minutes, I will try to answer one or two of them. Firstly, Mark, how do you define biogas? It's gas which is produced from the fermentation of biogenic materials, and that can be in a landfill where it's landfill biogas or landfill gas, or it can be in a captured vessel which is an anaerobic digester. Then you can take the biogas, you can clean it up, and you can make biomethane out of it, which is equivalent of natural gas, which you can either use as a fuel for your vehicles, or you can put into the gas grid as countries do increasingly in the Western world. Glenn Carney, yes, we need to promote the benefit of biogas, being able to achieve carbon negative in the circular economy. Yes, you're absolutely right. And to tackle both heat and transport decarbonization through the existing pipe networks. Well, of course, we also have to be realistic. I think, Glenn, we can do this, but we have to look at where biogas can give the best bang for its buck. And my personal view on this is that is probably actually substituting vehicle fuel, particularly heavy goods vehicles, and particularly things like buses in urban situations where you also have a question of air quality to overcome. But that's a debate which we have, and we will continue to have. And I think that there's no one solution. For example, where there aren't existing gas pipe networks in many countries, particularly in the developing world, well, then you've got to look at whether electricity or fuel is the right answer there. I think that increased Walter from Italy is talking about the acceptance of biogas. I know that in Italy, there are big questions around building anything. You have the NIMBY phenomenon, which is very deeply rooted in a lot of communities and politically exploited. But Italy is actually, you should be encouraged, Walter, that Italy is actually one of the countries in the world that is leading in biogas and has more biogas plants than most. So don't be negative. Everything is possible, even in difficult circumstances. Lastly, I think that people have asked me questions about the UK. The future of the industry in the UK is rosy. Yes, there are many large-scale projects being built. Home biogas digesters, small digesters. The question of small digesters, if you go around the developing world, we will see millions and millions and millions of small digesters. And one of the graphs that I showed early on, I think that we have somewhere in the region of 50 million small family size or community size or farm size biogas digesters, particularly in Asia, particularly in China, but also now increasingly in Africa. And so, yes, the best way, of course, not to have waste is to recycle them at home. Very difficult to do when you live in a block of flats, but quite easy to do if you live out in the countryside and you have a bit of space And you can use animal manure with your own manure and your own food waste to make biogas. The last question I think I'm going to answer now is, why doesn't biogas reach the level of other renewable energies like wind? Well, I think there's two answers to this. Firstly, biogas requires a feedstock, and a feedstock has to be collected and has to be brought to a biogas plant. Now, whether that's animal waste or farm waste or human waste or food waste, it has to be collected. And one of the great reasons why there is not more biogas produced is that actually countries do not collect these wastes, but they throw them into the environment. And it is our mission to turn that round so that more and more of these wastes actually go into treatment. Now, I will stop there. The webinar slides, yes, they will be made available. Eleanor, is that okay with you that we make your slides available publicly? Yep, and we will get Robert, who is in the Secretariat listening to us, to put them into PDF and to send them around to you. If there are questions that we haven't answered and I don't have time to answer them all, please send Robert an email and we will be very, very pleased over the next day or two to answer them for you. These are our contact, these are my email contact details. Eleanor's are at the CCAC. Do we have them here, Helena? Let me look quickly. No.
I asked Robert to send it around together with the slides so everybody can get it.
Okay, well then, if Robert will send you the slides and the email contacts, so please feel free to write to us with any specific questions. Eleanor, let me thank you for your time. I look forward to the dialogue which we will continue together over the next few weeks and months.
Thank you to everyone. Interesting questions as well. Thank you, David, and everybody.
Thank you both, and thank you, Robert, as well, and thank you all for listening in. Bye-bye. Robert, will you log us out, yes?